Chapter 1. The Past. It had been 5 years since the end of the Vorian War, and Earth had undergone a profound transformation. The once divided nations of the world had united under a common banner, pooling their resources and their knowledge to rebuild and strengthen their planet. The scars of the conflict were still visible, but the human spirit had proven unbreakable, and the people of Earth had emerged from the crucible of war with a newfound sense of purpose and determination. At the heart of this transformation stood Dr. Lena Soren, the brilliant scientist and visionary leader who had guided humanity through its darkest hour. Now, as the newly appointed ambassador of Earth to the Galactic Council, Lena found herself at the forefront of a new era of diplomacy and discovery. But even as Earth basked in the glow of its newfound status, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. Whispers of a new threat began to circulate through the corridors of power, rumors of a shadowy organization known as the Nexus, which sought to destabilize the delicate balance of power in the galaxy. As Lena and her team worked tirelessly to unravel the mystery of the Nexus, they found themselves drawn into a web of intrigue and deception that stretched across the stars. They discovered that the Nexus was no mere band of criminals or terrorists, but a vast and ancient conspiracy that had been manipulating the course of galactic events for centuries. At the heart of the Nexus stood a figure known only as the Architect, a brilliant and enigmatic mastermind who sought to remake the galaxy in his own image. The Architect believed that the only way to ensure the survival and prosperity of sentient life was to impose a strict order upon the chaos of the universe, to create a perfect society where every being knew their place and served their appointed role. To the Architect and his followers, the very idea of free will and self-determination was a dangerous illusion, a weakness that had to be stamped out at any cost. They saw the rise of humanity as a threat to their grand design, a wild card that could upset the delicate balance they had worked so hard to maintain. As Lena and her team raced to uncover the true extent of the Nexus's influence, they found themselves facing a moral and ethical dilemma that would test the very foundations of their beliefs. For the Architect's vision of a perfect society was seductive in its simplicity, offering a world without conflict, without suffering, without the messy unpredictability of free will. But Lena and her companions knew that such a world would come at a terrible price. They believed that the very essence of what made humanity special, what had allowed them to overcome impossible odds and forge a new path among the stars, was their ability to choose their own destiny, to dream and to strive and to hope. And so, as the shadow of the Nexus loomed ever larger, the defenders of Earth found themselves once again called to action, ready to fight for the future of their planet and the ideals that defined them. They knew that the road ahead would be long and hard, that they would face challenges and sacrifices beyond anything they had ever known. But they also knew that they would face those challenges together, united in their determination to protect the spark of human ingenuity and adaptability that had brought them so far. As Lena looked out upon the stars, she knew that the battle for the soul of the galaxy had only just begun. But she also knew that humanity would not face that battle alone. For in the years since the Vorian War, Earth had forged new alliances and new friendships among the peoples of the cosmos, bonds of trust and cooperation that would stand them in good stead in the trials to come. And so, with a heart full of hope and a spirit unbroken, Lena Soren and the defenders of Earth prepared to face the shadows of the past and the challenges of the future, ready to fight for the dream of a brighter tomorrow. Chapter 2. The Gathering Storm. As the true nature of the Nexus threat began to reveal itself, Lena Soren and her team found themselves in a desperate race against time. They knew that the Architect's plans were moving forward at an alarming pace, and that every moment they delayed brought the galaxy one step closer to a future of oppression and control. To counter this threat, Lena and her allies began to mobilize the forces of Earth and their galactic partners, assembling a coalition of like-minded species and factions who shared their commitment to freedom and self-determination. It was a daunting task, for the Nexus had spent centuries seeding its influence throughout the galaxy, and its tendrils ran deep into the fabric of countless worlds and civilizations. At the heart of this mobilization effort stood the Galactic Defense Initiative, GDI, a new organization created to coordinate the military and intelligence assets of the coalition partners. Led by the brilliant strategic mind of General Nora Vega, the GDI worked tirelessly to gather information on the Nexus's activities and develop countermeasures to its advanced technologies. But even as the forces of freedom began to gather strength, the Nexus was not idle. The architect, sensing the growing resistance to his plans, unleashed a wave of terror and subversion across the galaxy, seeking to undermine the unity of his opponents and sow chaos and confusion in their ranks. On a dozen worlds, Nexus agents and sympathizers staged coups and uprisings, toppling governments and seizing control of key installations and resources. On others, they launched devastating attacks on civilian populations, sowing fear and panic among the masses and eroding the trust and stability that held galactic society together. Amid this growing storm, Lena and her team found themselves pushed to the brink, forced to confront challenges and threats on a scale they had never before imagined. They raced from world to world, trying to stem the tide of Nexus aggression and rally the forces of freedom to stand against the coming darkness. But even as they fought and struggled, they began to realize that the true battle was not one of weapons and warriors, but of ideas and beliefs. For the architect's vision, for all its horror and oppression, held a seductive power over the minds of many, promising an end to the chaos and uncertainty of the universe and a return to a simpler, more orderly way of life. To counter this, Lena and her allies knew that they needed more than just military might. They needed to inspire the peoples of the galaxy to believe in something greater than themselves, to believe in the power of free will and the potential of the individual to shape their own destiny. And so, even as the battle raged across the stars, Lena and her team began to craft a new narrative for the future of the galaxy, one that celebrated the diversity and resilience of sentient life and the endless possibilities of a universe where every being was free to choose their own path. It was a message that resonated with the hearts and minds of countless beings, from the highest corridors of power to the lowliest slums and ghettos of the galaxy. And as that message spread, as more and more people began to see the Nexus for the threat it truly was, the tide of the war began to turn. But the architect was not one to admit defeat easily, and as the forces of freedom began to close in on his strongholds, he unleashed his most terrible weapons and his most fanatical followers, determined to drag the galaxy down into oblivion rather than see his dream of a perfect society shattered. As the storm clouds gathered and the final battle loomed on the horizon, Lena Soren and her companions knew that they were in for the fight of their lives. But they also knew that they were not alone, that the hopes and dreams of countless beings across the galaxy were riding on their success. And so, with a fire in their hearts and a song of freedom on their lips, they prepared to face the gathering storm and the final confrontation with the forces of darkness, ready to risk everything for the chance to build a better tomorrow. Chapter 3. The Shadow War. As the war against the Nexus entered a new and brutal phase, Lena Soren and her allies found themselves embroiled in a shadowy conflict that stretched across the galaxy. The architect, ever cunning and elusive, had withdrawn his forces into the darkness, waging a campaign of terror and subversion from the shadows. In this new kind of war, the lines between friend and foe were blurred, and trust became a precious commodity. The Nexus agents were everywhere, lurking in the halls of power, infiltrating resistance cells, and sowing discord and confusion among the ranks of the coalition. To counter this threat, Lena and her team were forced to adopt new tactics and strategies, waging their own shadow war against the Architect's minions. They recruited spies and informants, planted false leads and misinformation, and engaged in daring covert operations deep behind enemy lines. At the forefront of this effort stood Takeshi Sato, the brilliant hacker and cyber warrior who had been instrumental in the liberation of Earth. Takeshi and his team of digital warriors waged a constant battle against the Nexus's vast information networks, seeking to unravel the Architect's plans and expose his secrets to the light of day. But even as they fought and struggled in the shadows, Lena and her companions knew that they could not win the war alone. They needed the support and cooperation of the galactic community, needed to build a united front against the Nexus threat. To this end, they undertook a series of daring diplomatic missions, reaching out to worlds and species that had previously been neutral or even hostile to the coalition cause. They negotiated treaties and alliances, offered aid and support to those in need, and slowly but surely began to build a web of unity and common purpose that stretched across the stars. But the Architect was not content to sit idle as his enemies gathered strength. He unleashed a series of devastating attacks on key coalition worlds, striking at the heart of the resistance and sowing chaos and despair in his wake. One by one, the brightest lights of the coalition were extinguished as the Nexus's shadow legions descended upon them like a plague. Entire cities were reduced to rubble, millions of lives were lost, and the galaxy teetered on the brink of despair. In the face of this onslaught, many began to lose hope, to question whether the fight against the Nexus was one that could ever truly be won. But Lena and her companions refused to give in to despair, refused to let the sacrifices of so many be in vain. They rallied the survivors, inspired them with their courage and determination, and slowly but surely began to turn the tide of the Shadow War. They struck back against the Nexus's strongholds, exposed its agents and collaborators, and began to chip away at the foundations of the Architect's power. But even as they fought and struggled, they knew that the true key to victory lay not in the destruction of the Nexus, but in the hearts and minds of the people it sought to enslave. They knew that they needed to offer the galaxy a new vision of the future, one that was based not on fear and control, but on hope and freedom. And so, even as the Shadow War raged on, Lena and her team began to lay the groundwork for a new galactic order, one that would rise from the ashes of the old and light the way to a brighter tomorrow. They reached out to the oppressed and the marginalized, offered them a hand of friendship and a promise of a better life. They built schools and hospitals, founded new colonies and outposts, and slowly but surely began to create a network of hope and solidarity that spanned the stars. And as the people of the galaxy began to see the promise of this new vision, as they began to believe in the possibility of a future free from the tyranny of the Nexus, the Shadow War began to turn in favor of the coalition. The Architect's power began to crumble, his agents and armies began to desert him, and the once mighty Nexus began to collapse under the weight of its own corruption and lies. But even as victory seemed within reach, Lena and her companions knew that the true test was yet to come. For in the final battle against the forces of darkness, they would need to confront not only the Architect and his minions, but also the deepest fears and doubts within themselves. And so, with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance, they prepared to face their greatest challenge yet, ready to risk everything for the chance to build a new and better world. Chapter 4: The Price of Victory. As the final battle against the Nexus loomed on the horizon, Lena Soren and her companions found themselves facing a bitter truth. Victory, if it came, would come at a terrible price. The war had taken a heavy toll on the coalition, both in lives lost and in the scars it had left on the hearts and minds of those who had fought and suffered. Across the galaxy, countless worlds lay in ruins, their populations decimated by the Nexus's brutal attacks. The once vibrant tapestry of galactic civilization had been torn asunder, and the task of rebuilding seemed almost insurmountable. But even as they grappled with the weight of their losses, Lena and her team knew that they could not afford to falter. The architect, though weakened and diminished, still posed a grave threat to the future of the galaxy, and they knew that they had to see their mission through to the end. And so, with heavy hearts and grim determination, they began to plan their final assault on the Nexus's stronghold. They gathered their forces, rallied their allies, and prepared to strike at the heart of the architect's power. But even as they laid their plans, they were forced to confront the harsh realities of the war they had been fighting. They had to make difficult choices, to weigh the lives of the many against the lives of the few, and to grapple with the moral and ethical dilemmas that arose from those choices. For Lena, the burden of leadership weighed heavily on her shoulders. She had to make decisions that would determine the fate of billions, had to send brave men and women into battle, knowing that many of them would not return. She had to balance the demands of strategy and tactics with the need to preserve the ideals and values that had brought the coalition together in the first place. And as the final battle drew near, she began to realize that the true price of victory might be higher than she had ever imagined. For in order to defeat the architect and his forces, they might have to sacrifice not only their own lives, but also the very principles they had been fighting to defend. It was a bitter pill to swallow, a realization that struck at the very core of everything Lena and her companions believed in. But they also knew that they could not shrink from the challenge, could not let the sacrifices of so many be in vain. And so, with a heavy heart and a steely resolve, Lena Soren led her forces into the final battle against the Nexus. They fought with courage and determination, with a fierce loyalty to each other and to the cause they served. In the end, after a long and brutal struggle, they emerged victorious. The architect was defeated, his armies scattered, and the Nexus was finally brought to its knees. But the cost of that victory was high, and the scars it left on the galaxy would take generations to heal. As Lena stood amidst the ruins of the Nexus's stronghold, surveying the destruction and the loss, she knew that the true work of rebuilding was only just beginning. She knew that the galaxy would need leaders and visionaries, people who could light the way to a brighter future and heal the wounds of the past. And she knew that, for better or for worse, she and her companions would have to be those leaders. They would have to bear the weight of the galaxy's hopes and dreams, would have to guide it through the long and difficult process of recovery and renewal. But even as she contemplated the enormity of the task before them, Lena felt a spark of hope flare to life in her heart. For in the midst of all the darkness and despair, she had seen glimpses of the incredible resilience and strength of the galactic spirit. She had seen people from all walks of life come together to fight for a common cause, had seen them risk everything for the chance to build a better world, and she knew that, as long as that spirit endured, as long as there were people willing to stand up and fight for what they believed in, the galaxy would never truly be lost. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose and a heart full of hope, Lena Soren and her companions prepared to face the challenges of the future, ready to lead the galaxy into a new era of peace, prosperity, and unity. Chapter 5. From the Ashes. In the aftermath of the final battle against the Nexus, the galaxy lay in ruins. The war had taken a devastating toll, leaving countless worlds shattered and billions of lives lost. The once vibrant tapestry of galactic civilization had been torn asunder, and the task of rebuilding seemed almost insurmountable. But even in the midst of the destruction and despair, there were glimmers of hope. Across the galaxy, people began to come together, united by a shared determination to build a better future. They cleared away the rubble, tended to the wounded, and slowly but surely began to piece their shattered lives back together. At the forefront of this effort stood Lena Soren and her companions, the heroes who had led the charge against the Nexus and brought about its downfall. They traveled from world to world, offering aid and support to those in need, and working tirelessly to lay the foundations for a new galactic order. It was a daunting task, one that required all of their strength, courage, and wisdom. They had to navigate a complex web of political alliances and rivalries, had to balance the needs of countless different species and cultures, and had to find ways to bridge the deep divides that the war had left in its wake. But they were not alone in their efforts. Across the galaxy, a new generation of leaders was rising up, inspired by the example of Lena and her team. These were individuals who had been forged in the crucible of war, who had seen the worst that the galaxy had to offer and had emerged stronger and more determined than ever. Together, they began to build a new network of cooperation and collaboration, one that spanned the stars and brought together people from all walks of life. They established new institutions and organizations designed to promote peace, prosperity, and mutual understanding among the diverse peoples of the galaxy. And slowly but surely, the galaxy began to heal. The wounds of the past began to mend, and a new sense of hope and possibility began to take hold. People began to look to the future with renewed optimism, eager to explore the vast potential of a universe that was finally at peace. But even as the galaxy began to rebuild, Lena and her companions knew that their work was far from over. They knew that the scars of the war would take generations to fully heal, and that there would always be those who sought to exploit the chaos and uncertainty for their own gain. And so they remained vigilant, always ready to defend the fragile peace they had fought so hard to achieve. They continued to lead by example, modeling the values of compassion, cooperation, and selfless service that had brought them through the darkest of times. As the years passed, Lena Soren became a legend, a shining beacon of hope and inspiration for the entire galaxy. Her name was spoken with reverence and awe, and her deeds were celebrated in song and story across the stars. But for Lena herself, the greatest reward was the knowledge that she had made a difference. She had helped to build a better world, had given the galaxy a chance to start anew and chart a course towards a brighter tomorrow. And as she looked out across the vast expanse of the universe, she knew that the journey was far from over. There would always be new challenges to face, new frontiers to explore, and new wonders to discover. But she also knew that, as long as there were people like her and her companions, people who were willing to stand up and fight for what they believed in, the galaxy would never be without hope. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all. As the galaxy continued to rebuild and thrive in the years that followed, Lena Soren and her team became more than just heroes. They became symbols of the unbreakable spirit of unity and resilience that had brought the galaxy back from the brink. And though the scars of the war would never fully fade, they stood as a testament to the power of hope, courage, and the indomitable will of sentient life to overcome even the greatest of odds. Chapter 6: A New Dawn. Years turned into decades as the galaxy slowly healed from the devastating war against the Nexus. Under the guidance of Lena Soren and her companions, a new era of peace and prosperity had taken hold, one built on the foundations of cooperation, understanding, and mutual respect. The once shattered worlds of the galaxy had been rebuilt, their cities and infrastructure restored to their former glory. New technologies and innovations had emerged, born from the collective wisdom and ingenuity of countless different species working together towards a common goal. And at the heart of it all stood the Galactic Alliance, the new governing body that had risen from the ashes of the old order. Led by a council of representatives from every corner of the galaxy, the Alliance worked tirelessly to maintain the delicate balance of power and ensure that the hard-won peace would endure for generations to come. For Lena Soren, who had been elected as the Alliance's first Prime Minister, the challenges of leadership were never-ending. She spent her days shuttling between worlds, mediating disputes and forging new alliances, always striving to keep the fragile flame of unity alive. But even as she worked to build a better future, Lena knew that the scars of the past would never fully heal. She saw it in the haunted eyes of the veterans who had fought and survived the war, in the memorial walls that stretched across every world, bearing the names of the countless millions who had given their lives in defense of the galaxy. And she saw it in herself, in the quiet moments when the weight of her responsibilities seemed almost too much to bear. She had given so much of herself to the cause, had sacrificed so much in the name of duty and honor, and sometimes she wondered if it had all been worth it. But then she would remember the faces of the people she had fought for, the innocent lives she had helped to save, and the bright future she had helped to build. And she would know with a certainty that came from the very core of her being that it had all been worth it and more. As the years passed, Lena watched as a new generation came of age, one that had never known the horrors of war or the tyranny of the Nexus. They were a generation of dreamers and visionaries, of scientists and artists and explorers who looked to the stars with wonder and hope in their eyes. And Lena knew that it was for them that she had fought, for the chance to give them a galaxy that was free and full of possibility. She knew that they would face their own challenges and trials, that there would always be those who sought to sow discord and chaos, but she also knew that they would meet those challenges with the same courage and determination that had carried her own generation through the darkest of times. And so, as she stood on the balcony of the Alliance headquarters, looking out over the gleaming spires of the capital city, Lena Soren felt a sense of peace wash over her. She knew that her work was not yet done, that there would always be more to do in the service of the greater good, but she also knew that the galaxy was in good hands. For as long as there were those who believed in the power of unity and the strength of the galactic spirit, as long as there were those who were willing to stand up and fight for what was right, the galaxy would never truly be lost, and that, in the end, was the greatest legacy of all. As the sun set over the horizon, casting a warm glow across the city, Lena Soren smiled, knowing that the dawn of a new era had arrived. The future was uncertain, as it always was, but one thing was clear. The galaxy had been given a second chance, and it was up to all of them to make the most of it. And with the strength of their convictions, the power of their unity, and the light of hope in their hearts, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead and emerge stronger and more united than ever before.